Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume. It is the week of September 22nd, and this is your Monday briefing. The House last week passed a continuing resolution to keep the government open through November 20th, but Washington cannot exhale just yet. We're going to talk about this as well as the latest on digital services tax. And joining me to talk about what's happening in Washington is Scott McCandless. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Sindhu. Good to be with you.
So, as I just mentioned, the House passed a bill, a CR, to keep the government funded through November 20th. And now all eyes are on the Senate as they try to pass a bill. So, what are the sticking points? And this time around, what's different?
Sure. Great questions. And I am a bit apologetic. I don't want to further deepen the cynicism anyone might feel towards Washington, but this is one of those circumstances where it might be justified. What ends up happening a lot with these government funding debates is they tend to be a game of political chicken based around which party might get the lion's share of the blame for the government shutdown that could occur. We're not there yet. We still have some time before midnight on September 30th next week when this all comes to a head. So there is still some time to avoid it. But the calculus that both parties are doing right now is the extent to which the other party would get blamed, which is very unfortunate. The CR itself isn't necessarily the most difficult lift in the world. They're just trying to see who has political advantage going into this. And that's I think, where some of the cynicism might justifiably arise. But in terms of some of the mechanics here, as you noted, the House Republicans were able to pass a clean continuing resolution. Clean just simply means that there are no real policy changes in it. It's just extending current funding so that we don't have a shutdown and can continue to negotiate by some time till after November 20th, like you said. So that's one approach. The Democrats, however, are demanding that some policy should be changed in the context of this continuing resolution, and they're holding out hope and holding out negotiating position to see if they can achieve that. What informs them is what happened back in the spring. We had an almost identical situation where we were almost going to have a government shutdown. House Republicans passed a clean CR, put pressure on the Democrats to accept that. Democrats suddenly feared that they would be blamed if they didn't pass a clean CR, that they would bear the blame for a shutdown, and went ahead and helped pass that government spending bill. Remember that with only 53 Republicans in the Senate, you need at least 7 Democrats to cross over. So this is a situation where it has to have some kind of bipartisanship. And after Chuck Schumer, the Democratic senator from New York who leads the Democrats in the Senate, after he went along with that clean continuing resolution in March, he took some heat from his own party for doing so. And a lot of his own party is demanding that they show more fight against President Trump and the Republicans this time around. So I think that is informing their position, making them be a little bit more dug in, and I think heightening the risk that we do have a government shutdown next week. Again, I don't want to say we will. We still have time, although I should note that both the House and Senate are out on recess this week, but that doesn't mean they can't continue negotiating, and they will. We're still hopeful they'll avoid it, but the mechanics of how they set this up politically is what's driving the uncertainty.
And political maneuvering continues to be very much Washington's story, as with previous CRs. Now, what questions are companies asking you as they brace for a possible shutdown?
Sure, they're asking about the extent to which tax and maybe some other similarly related policies might be able to get into the conversation. That ranges from, could there be another reconciliation bill like the one that the Republicans did earlier this summer? That seems very doubtful. Could there be a bipartisan standalone tax bill? Conceivable, but again, I think the chances might be low. But there's still talk about that, so we have to be aware that that could be on the horizon. And then the third is the extent to which the CR, whether the one right now or the one that could come later this fall. Remember, the one we were just talking about would only go till November 21st. You'd probably have another short-term continuing resolution necessary after that one. Could either the current or a subsequent continuing resolution carry some tax and related policy? That is quite conceivable. And there are some issues such as the Affordable Care Act premium tax credits that likely need to be addressed before the end of the year. And there are a variety of other tax issues that could come up. However, let me temper expectations. Even if there are some tax items that could get into that conversation and potentially ride along with the CR later this year, it is unlikely to be of any breadth or depth to really move the meter on a lot of business tax interests that some of our listeners might be interested in. But it is still a possibility that tax could enter the conversation to ride along with a future continuing resolution.
All right, thank you for that. And then Government funding has been the priority, but what other legislative activity should companies monitor in Washington, and any movement on a second reconciliation bill or the rescissions bill that was previously approved?
No, as I mentioned, the second reconciliation bill seems to have a relatively low chance. However, one issue that is still floating around, and forgive me if this seems like just too good of a setup for our next speaker, but it's with regard to the Section 899 issue. There is still some concern that the OECD and the member countries that have agreed to try to move forward on Pillar 2, but who also, through their G7 meeting earlier this summer, agreed to try to find some way to soften that blow for the United States, whether that promise can be fulfilled. So there's still some uncertainty about that. And so long as that uncertainty remains, the prospect for a reintroduction of Section 899 cannot be said to be zero. Doesn't mean it will be in the same form that it took before. There may be other intermediate steps that could be taken before introduction of a bill like that, such as letters to Treasury. But that is one potential hotspot that is a little bit off the radar right now that could suddenly roar back before the end of this calendar year that we have to watch out for.
Scott, thank you so much for walking through this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sindhu.
And now for the latest on digital services tax and Pillar 2, I'm pleased to be joined by Stewart Brant. Stewart, welcome.
Hi, Sindhu. Thank you.
So we've been hearing a lot about digital services taxes lately, and the debate seems to be heating up, from President Trump's state visit to the UK last week to a major court decision in France. So what should companies take away from all this, and where do DSTs seem to be headed?
Great. So concerning digital service taxes, or DSTs, ever since President Trump returned to office, his administration and Republican members of Congress have been ramping up the usual threats. Think retaliatory taxes, tariffs, and even export restrictions against countries that have DSTs. This isn't really new. They tried it during his last term, too. Whether it'll actually work this time, still up in the air. Take France, for example. They were one of the first major economies to put a DST in place back in 2019. Their constitutional court just recently issued a ruling upholding the constitutionality of the country's 3% DST. So it's sticking around for now. That means companies hit by this tax, including a lot of US tech firms, probably can't argue against it in French courts anymore. The US government has called the tax discriminatory against American businesses, but so far, international talks have not yet led to its removal. There were some tariffs the US put on hold back in 2021. Those could come back, but it kind of depends on broader US-EU trade talks. More recently, several US Republican lawmakers, led by Representative Ron Estes, penned a letter to President Trump ahead of his state visit to the UK last week, urging him to push the UK to drop their 2% DST or get the US to reconsider an investigation which could lead to more tariffs if the UK doesn't budge. So far, the UK isn't showing signs of giving in. Instead, Trump's UK trip ended with a technology prosperity deal, which is all about working together on things like AI, nuclear energy, and emerging technologies. But it doesn't touch the DST issue. So what does all this mean for companies? Well, basically, DSTs like the ones in France and the UK are still a sore spot for the US under President Trump and lots of folks in Congress. What's actually going to happen next is still anyone's guess. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. More updates are sure to come.
Thanks for that, Stewart. So there has been some news around the Pillar 2 negotiations. What are you hearing?
Well, in terms of the ongoing OECD negotiations surrounding Pillar 2 and the proposed side-by-side system, I don't expect dramatic breakthroughs in the near term. The OECD is working to resolve issues by the end of the year, though some countries remain concerned about fairness, compliance costs, competitive disadvantages for their companies. Despite some excitement in the US over the potential side-by-side agreement, the machinery of Pillar 2 implementation, it grinds on with consultations, law, regulations, and forms continuing to be published almost daily.
All right, and I know you are following all of that, so I hope to have you back soon to fill us in. Thanks so much, Stewart.
Thanks, Sindhu.
All right, that does it for us today. Stay tuned for more as we follow implications of government funding in Washington and much more. We appreciate you spending this time with us and hope you have a good week.